Hello and welcome to Hops and Bros. This week, we're talking fruits.
For an open window on a crafty world, Max and Chris from Ups and Bros. Ups and Bros. Welcome to Ups and Bros.
Alright, so this week we're diving into the fantastical world of sours, and more specifically, the world of fruited sours. Now, we've talked about sours in the past. We've talked about lactobacillus. We've talked about some barrel aging that has sour notes. But we've never done a kind of combined video on fruited sours. And with the industry kind of moving more towards this fruited sour combination, which is not new. It has been used for many years, but it is kind of new to the area in Ontario. Chris, where exactly do fruited sours come from? Why is it so important to this industry, and why do we keep on seeing new fruited sours?
Alright, so this week, what's a fruited sour? Basically, before we dive a little bit more deeper into fruited sours, if you haven't checked out our video on lactobacillus or just Lacto 101, please check it out. Link is going to be right up there. Check it first because we're going to be talking about a lot of components coming from this, especially lactobacillus, which is mostly known to give it that nice acidic sourness to your beer. We can basically split things off. We can explain all the different styles presented into fruited sours, but you can easily think about Berlin of Ice or Catarina sours. Catarina sours, if you haven't heard about them yet, it's a style coming from Brazil. It's a style that actually Alex from Duder Breja taught me about and got me into it, and I actually tried my first one from a beer trade that I did with him last year. So using fruits in beer has been present for almost all beer history, because basically it was used in the beginning as kind of like an accelerator into your infection of the beer. Because as we all know, fruits, when they get ripe, when they get ready, they do start to ferment by themselves. So adding those ready to ferment fruits to your wort or to your beer will create microflora and bacteria prone to create beer or alcohol in the end product. Because yes, fruits contain sugars, which builds up to CO2 and alcohol once it's all fermented. Historic breweries like Cantillon that have been open since the 1900s. Yeah, my English is not perfect. Always experimented with fruit into their sours, and they have their own range of different fruited sours. One made with cherries, one made with raspberries, one made with apricots. So all those are natural fruits that have a little bit of sourness into them. So what does that mean? Adding them, mixing them with an already sour beer, it makes it a little bit more easier to drink. You get a little bit more sweetness out of it, brings out nice colors into your beer, and also just rounds up the flavors and makes the acidity and the sourness of the beer a little bit less harsh. So lately we've seen breweries like 450 Brewing out there in the US booming into the industry with a lot of fruited sours, heavy in fruits, big bold colors, and it really caught my attention because it brings new people to the industry, but also it's a little part of not being always perfect. And what do I mean by that is a strike of exploding cans and bad ABV ratings on their label that kind of like sprung everywhere onto the beer media, beer social media. And it really kind of like shook me because one of the main thing, if you go onto Milk the Funk wiki page about fruit addition into sours, the first thing that they say, never add fruit to your beer to cover up off flavors. And sometimes it does feel like that when you try a fruited sour. It's just like, let's throw some fruit in there to cover up some of the off flavors and maybe we'll get away with it. But again, playing with fruits is a big challenge because yes, it can bring a second fermentation microorganism that you don't know about into your beer. Adding fruit to your beer is a science, and Max will dive a lot more deeper into that, but if you want to play a little bit around with fruits, please do rest assured or make sure to play with pasteurized version either of your beer in the final product or with the fruits themselves. So that's fruited sours in its historical or maybe its usage in the marketing world or beer world. But Max, how do you brew a beer with fruits, or how do you make a fruited sours, and how the science and all of that makes it one main thing?
All right, so using fruit in beer. Chris kind of looked at the historical aspect of using this and kind of the pitfalls that this industry has been going through in the last couple of years. Now, fruited sours have been around for many years, especially in countries like Belgium, but also the United States. America has been doing fruited sours and fruited beers for a long time. And it's only recently hit Ontario, mostly because sours in general are fairly new to Ontario, to Canada. Even one of the godfathers of craft beer in Canada, in the region of BC, not everywhere can you find fruited sours. It's a very specific palate, very specific person who is going to gravitate towards that kind of beer, which makes it not necessarily the most popular style out there, but definitely for you beer geeks out there, it makes it a very kind of a guideline. If a brewery is doing those, you're going to base the quality of the brewery on their sours, on their fruited sours, on whatever more extreme beers they're doing, including IPAs, New England style IPAs, double IPAs, American IPAs, anything that is kind of in the extreme. I say extreme because beer is about balance historically and recently as well. When you're looking at your macros out there, beer is about balance. You're using hops to balance the sweetness of your malts. Hops are a little more on the bitter side, balancing the sweetness that your grain is going to bring with those sugars and those non-fermentable sugars, depending on your process of brewing, if you want those non-fermentable sugars or not. It's going to be important later for the fruit aspect of the beer. So extremes. It's kind of interesting in beer because it shouldn't be there. And even when talking about bitterness, your palate shouldn't necessarily like bitter. You should like more of a balanced kind of product. But people have gravitated towards IPAs and have fallen in love with them. And same thing with sours. In the last 5 years, you've seen a boom in sours in Ontario, in the States, in Quebec, in everywhere, basically. And it's another one of those extreme. Now, why I'm talking about bitterness when we're talking about sours, you'd think it's alien, it's completely different, it's a different aspect of beer. And if you follow my concept of the triangle, where you have sweetness, sourness, and bitterness, and you're kind of trying to find your way in that triangle to create your beer, both should be different parts, completely different, but they're not. Your palate kind of analyzes them in a very similar way. The taste buds that you have are going to analyze bitterness and sourness in a very weirdly similar way, where some people are actually going to mistake one for the other. You're going to taste something that's super bitter, you're going to call it sour, you're going to taste something that's super tart, and you're going to think it's very bitter. Working in this industry and seeing it right in front of you, people literally tasting a sour beer and saying, no, I don't like this, it's too bitter. Well, I always thought it was weird until I learned about this kind of palate trick, or the trickery that your palate does when tasting beer, when tasting those extreme beers. Now, where does fruit fit into this? We've talked about sours before, we've talked about lactobacillus, we've talked about sour beers and how they kind of work and how they work in this industry. But adding fruit to it, as Chris mentioned, it is historically accurate. People have been doing it for a while. When you look at the evolution of man, the fermentation of grain is up there, but also the fermentation of fruit and the addition of both together is common. It's been happening for a while, and with reason. When you're looking at a sour beer, and when you're looking at, more specifically, we're going to talk about kettle sours right now. Kettle sours create mostly a non-distinct sour. It's sour, but it doesn't have flavor to it. Adding fruit to it changes that. Adding a sour fruit to a sour base is going to help your brain analyze this, and it's going to help the flavors go through in a more organic way, which is really good. Chris mentioned milk de funk and how a few years ago in Ontario we've had problems with exploding cans. Fruits still have sugars to them, so if you don't wait for it to ferment out when you're releasing that beer, you're packaging it before it's done fermentation, your yeast is actually going to keep fermenting. Fruits have fructose when it comes to sugars, and it's very, very easy for your yeast to ferment. That's why you have to be careful. You've got to make sure that your beer is fully fermented before you package it, or else you'll have some exploding cans and gushing bottles, which is not necessarily good, and it's not good for the industry in general. Which is interesting, because when you're doing a sour beer, you're not looking for the addition of sugars to your beer. You're looking for the flavor. Some people have been doing what's called floor ripening, which I think is really interesting, because what's really important about the fruit is actually the skin, and in some situations the pit of that fruit. So the skin, as it is ripening, is going to create more and more intense aromas and intense flavors, and that's what you're looking for when you're fermenting that beer, when you're adding it to your sour beer. You're not looking for the addition of sugar, you're not looking for the sweetness of that fruit, you're looking for the fruity character. And that's really important, because you don't necessarily want to go buy the perfect looking fruit for your sour beers. You're actually looking for kind of the runt of the fruit pack. You're looking for whatever can't be sold to the public because it's too, it's just not good, not appealing to the public. You want that fruit that's been there for just a little too long and has developed more intense aromas, more intense flavors from it, and that's really gonna help balance your beer. We're back to balance. We're back to using fruit in an extreme way in sours to balance out your beer. So if you've seen our other videos on sours and on lactobacillus and on different ways of fermenting your beer, you probably already know a lot about the different kinds of souring for your beer. Now, this video is mostly just to kind of include the fruiting aspect of that. Beer's about balance in a weird way, even though the beer geeks out there, which I am part of, will tell you that, no, it's about, the hoppiest IPA or the sourest sour. No, I think still to this day, even if people are looking for extremes, they're looking for a balance in their extremes. And fruit is the way to go when you're doing a sour. You gotta kind of stay clear of those sweeter fruit. Those sweeter fruits still have their place, but not necessarily into an overly extreme tart beer. When it comes to tartness in beer, you kind of want to match the tartness of that fruit so that the palate is not shocked by this. It kind of makes sense. If you're having a strawberry beer, your mind has to kind of go, oh, strawberries are kind of on the tart side, but they're not necessarily over tart, or they're not sweet. You still have to kind of figure out that perfect balance in between. One berry that we've seen in a lot of beers, especially beers from Sudbury, mostly because blueberries grow in Sudbury, people using blueberries in beer. I've seen a lot of different ways of using it. You've got your blueberry blonde, you've got your blueberry wheat, and some people have been doing blueberry sours. Blueberries are one of those weird fruits that people kind of associate with pies sometimes, which pies are sweet, but the fruit can be kind of tart. So you kind of have to play with that, which is, I think, one of my favorite things about the human palate in beer. What attracted me to this industry mostly is the human palate. You're always playing for the human palate, and taste is subjective, which means that someone is going to kind of have their conceptions of what a fruit should taste like or a beer should taste like, and when you put them together, it might not always work. But I think that experimenting with that and playing that human palate is essential to kind of bring the sours to the next level. And if you've missed our other videos, definitely go check them out. Go check out the kettle souring. Go check out our do we have a mixed fermentation sour? You know what? Let me know in the comments below, A, if you like us talking about sours and extreme beers, and B, let me know if we've done a mixed fermentation sour, because I think we did, but I don't know how much in detail we went. And if you guys want to learn more about mixed fermentation is beautiful, because beer should be a more natural way of process. We've isolated those grains into a stainless steel tank and added the yeast we wanted to it to create the perfect beer, which is great. But sometimes you gotta let that beer go the way it's gonna going to want to go, which means mixed fermentation, using different kinds of probiotic bacterias mixed with different wild yeast and different brewer's yeast to create a very well-balanced product. Anyways, I hope this video kind of clarified fruited sours for you. I know it's very vague, but it's one of those things that's so new that, yeah, it is going to be vague because people are still experimenting with. And just test your palate. Go taste some beers, go taste some fruit, see what you like. Oh, and if you like this video, please leave a like in the description below, leave us your comments, and share this with your friends. The more people we have watching the show, the more we're going to be doing it, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, I like doing this show. I'm probably still going to do it even if no one watches, but it'd be nice to have you guys around. All right, we'll see you guys on the next one.